Speaker is Elizabeth Rodriguez Marquez from Lupe. Lupe is a community organization in Rio Grande Valley, Texas. It was founded by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. And I did want to also announce that today is World Day to End Child Labor. So I know we'll have a little segment on child labor as well, but feel free later after the webinar to go ahead and use your social media channels to post about child labor today, ending child labor. All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rose, for the introduction. And so we're going to start with some basic information. We have some slides to share with you and a few statistics just to kind of give an overview. We're so grateful to have Elizabeth with us from Lupe. She's going to tell us some stories and talk about specific things in Texas. And we're just looking forward to the conversation that we'll share today. There'll be a place for questions later, as Rose shared. So here we go. Basic farm worker facts. There are more than 2 million farm workers in the U.S. In some situations, we count them as 1.5 million. Others count it as 2.5 million. I think it's hard to be extremely specific about how many farm workers there are in the U.S., but it's around 2 million. The large majority of those are immigrants. You can see the statistic that is on the screen right now. I want to be real clear that farm workers are the people who work the land. They're not the land owners. They are people specifically hired to plant, cultivate, and harvest our crops, in some cases to pack those crops to be sent across the country. A large number of farm workers are undocumented, but many of them have been in the U.S. for more than 10 years, even if they haven't been here continuously. A report by the USDA in May of this year said that roughly half of hired crop farm workers lack legal immigration status. The share of hired crop workers, farm workers who are not legally authorized to work in the United States, grew from roughly 14% in 1989 to almost 55% in the period of 99 to 2001. In recent years, it has declined to about 40%, so less than half. And the Department of Labor said that they certified in 2021 31,000 temporary jobs that would be H-2A, guest worker visas. That's more than 6 times the number that was certified in 2005. But only about 80% of those actually turned into issuing a visa for them. And just so that you know, there are farm workers in every state, but the largest numbers of farm workers are in the states of California, Florida, Michigan, North Carolina, and Washington, Oregon. Just to give you an overview of farm workers in the U.S. So what about labor laws that are related to farm workers in the U.S.? So most farm workers lack the basic labor protections, things like workers' compensation, health insurance, disability insurance. There's a lot of workers in the U.S. that don't have some of those things. In the mid-1930s, the U.S. passed several labor laws to protect workers, but farm workers and domestic workers were specifically excluded. In 1935, the National Labor Relations Act provided the right to organize without retaliation, but farm workers are excluded. And that law has not changed since. In 1938, the Fair Labor Standards Act was enacted, and it guarantees most workers a minimum wage for the hours that they work, provides for overtime pay at a rate of 1.5 times what you make during a regular work week. And then it requires employers to comply with record-keeping requirements so that this can be taken care of. In 1966, the Fair Labor Standards Act was updated, but again excluded, this time it included farm workers, but only in relation to minimum wage, the record-keeping provisions, and so what happened was a lot of farm workers are paid piece rate, but it required that even with piece rate, farm workers were guaranteed to get a minimum wage for each of the hours they worked. That was a guarantee. Overtime, however, was not provided in this legislation and is still not applicable to farm workers, except in specific states where it has been passed. And the other exclusion that happened was if you have less than 7 farm workers on your farm, a small farm, which there are more of those than you could imagine, they're not even protected by the minimum wage standards. So on a state level, this has been enacted in some places, and yet there's a lot of pushback from employers about paying overtime. The hope was that farm workers who work overtime anyway would get a higher amount for the hours that they worked overtime. Instead, in the states where the overtime legislation has been required, a lot of the employers now hire more farm workers so they can keep all of their farm workers at 40 hours a week. So in the past, where a farm worker might work 60 hours a week, now they're really confined to 40, and other workers make up those extra hours. So it's been a real battle because farm workers say, in fact, they earn less than they did before because they don't have to work the extra hours, but they're here to work. And now they're not even being able to work the extra hours of the week. Another issue that farm workers face are low wages. And so when we looked at food justice issues several years ago, this was a statement that we made then. The great paradox of our food system is that the very people who work to feed the U.S. struggle to feed their own families. And in fact, farm workers have the lowest annual family incomes of any U.S. wage and salary workers in the U.S. They already experience food insecurity disproportionately. Among U.S. populations, farm workers are more likely to struggle to put food on the table, while about 10% of the general population experiences food insecurity. Anywhere from 47 to 82% of farm worker households struggle with it. This is from an April 2023 report from the Union of Concerned Scientists. So lots more that we need to do. In the area of health and safety, farm work is hard work. Farm workers have to deal with the physical aspects of the kind of work that they do, the environmental aspects as well. And so when we look at some of those, some of the chronic and acute health risks that farm workers are exposed to are, and we'll talk about this specifically in a minute, but exposure to farm chemicals like pesticides and fertilizer, exposure to high levels of dust, which can contain mold, bacteria, and other things. And right now in the news, we're reading a lot and hearing about, and some of us in different parts of the country are experiencing poor air quality from the Canadian wildfires that is drifting down into the US. So this impacts farm workers incredibly, since they are outside, and in most cases, they live under the circumstance, if you don't work, you don't get paid. So there's a lot of pressure for them to continue working even when air quality is poor. They have falls from ladders or farm equipment, even in grain bins. They have exposure to ultraviolet rays from the sun, which can result in skin cancer. They have joint and ligament injuries, which can result in arthritic conditions and affect their mobility. The exposure to loud noises and sounds from machinery and equipment. They often are harvesting right behind large tractors. This can result in hearing loss. There are, I mentioned some environmental issues, heat stroke, frostbite, hypothermia, depending on what part of the country you are in at the time and what kind of work you're doing. The planting part of berries in the Northwest takes place when it's still usually very cold. And then, of course, we know about heat stress and struggles with that in the summer. So these are some of the physical challenges that farm workers have in the work that they do. So they're exposed to toxic pesticides. They face direct and indirect pesticide exposure. This can often cause medical issues, sometimes in the extreme, reproductive problems, birth defects, Alzheimer's, diabetes, cancer, and memory loss. Women and children are especially vulnerable to the damaging effects of pesticide exposure. The direct exposure often comes from farm workers will tell us about times when they're literally sprayed, but they also have pesticide drift that comes from places that have been sprayed and the chemicals have dried and they become a powder. And so they're carried away in the wind. A lot of farm worker housing is close to fields, so it's easy for that to take place. Their housing, sometimes their daycares, and certainly their work. They can be working in a field next to a field that was already sprayed, but the drift comes over. Farm workers inadvertently carry some of the residue of those pesticides on their clothing and their shoes when they go back home. And this is when exposure occurs, especially for younger family members, for children who are very vulnerable to the overwhelming exposure of pesticide through their toys or touching the clothing or that kind of thing. And farm workers have really a lack of access to healthcare. Most cannot afford insurance. Sometimes they're served by migrant clinics or neighborhood clinics, but in general, they don't have health insurance, so they avoid the costs associated with getting assistance for things, and so will suffer longer a lot of times from respiratory difficulties and that sort of thing. So pesticide is a big factor in their health. When we look at children in the fields, and this was the issue that we looked at more closely this past fall when we studied child labor in agriculture. But between 300 and 500,000 child farm workers work in the US. It's hard to get an accurate count. Most are unseen. Many are paid through their parents or in ways that you cannot track. But the estimates are that there's this many that are working. Some of them work full-time, some work on weekends, some work before and after school, depending on on where they live and the circumstances of their families. Under the current labor law, children as young as 12 can work unlimited hours outside of school with parental permission. This is unlike other youth jobs that are available in the community. And every day about 33 children are injured doing farm work. So a child working in agriculture dies about every 3 days. So the Fair Labor Standards Act has child labor protections that offer less protection to agricultural workers than to all other workers. So under the law for tasks designated by the Department of Labor as hazardous, there's a minimum age of 18 years for all industries except agriculture, which has a minimum age of 16 for those tasks, even though agriculture is one of the 3 most dangerous industries. So these are wonderful issues about which we're concerned. In relation to housing, farm workers commonly face substandard housing conditions, although not all of them do. But many workers pay high prices to live in crowded, unsanitary conditions. Sometimes they're required to get housing on their own. And so they face expensive rent or they face exploitation in communities. I know one time I visited a community in Immokalee, Florida, and folks were living in mobile homes that were designed to hold 4 people, maybe 6 at the most, and there would be 20 people in the mobile home. And when it was not the harvest season, it cost $200 a month. But during harvest season, they charged each worker $100 a week to live there. So there's lots of ways to exploit farm worker need in housing like that. And that housing had 1 bathroom for everyone to use. So not very good conditions. A lot of farm workers live in isolated areas. So they're in a sense out of sight, out of mind, and a lot of us are not necessarily aware. We have discovered in some communities, a lot of farm workers live in some level of renovated old motel buildings, where again, the motel has 1 bed or maybe 2 beds, and 4 to 6 people share that room. So these are ongoing concerns that we have about farm workers and housing. In relation to specifically women in agriculture, females in the field are often given the least desired, lowest paying jobs and are often the first to be laid off, have fewer opportunities to advance, and they face a culture of discrimination in the workplace. They endure nearly all the same issues that male farm workers face, as well as some that are largely unique, a predominance of sexual harassment and gender discrimination, and the health risks of working while they're pregnant. The Human Rights Watch, in a report that they did several years ago, said as many as 8 out of 10 farm worker women interviewed reported sexual harassment. So these are some of the basic issues that farm workers face. You'll see a section on the National Farm Worker Ministry's website about issues farm workers face. We have a downloadable resource that sort of hits the highlights the way I have. And at this point, we want to invite Elizabeth to speak to Texas, to talk a little bit about farm workers in Texas and some of the issues that they're facing. Elizabeth?
Hi, Julie. Hello, everybody. My name is Elizabeth. Marquez, Rodriguez Marquez, and I am a community organizer with Lupe, La Unión del Pueblo Entero. We, like Julie said, we were founded by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. So the organization that I work for now used to be the United Farm Worker Association. And I have been working with farm workers now for, well, since 2018, all over the state of Texas. So Texas is a large state, and it is one of the leaders in the agricultural industry. We have cattle, we have dairy farms, we have meat packers, and we produce all major types of produce, along as well as imports and exports of all types of exotic produce as well. So Texas is a very busy state, and Hidalgo County, the county where I live in, is #1 importer exporter for the state of Texas, for the entire United States. It also houses the most amount of farm workers in the entire state of Texas. So this is a unique area. It is an area where a lot of people come to learn about agriculture and to learn about farm worker issues. But it's important to remind people that the agricultural industry produces billions upon billions of dollars for America every year. So the majority of the workers in the Rio Grande Valley are seasonal workers. The border wall and checkpoints make the RGV a unique space for us. So in the picture that I have here, there's a border wall where the farm workers are working. And although it might look like the border wall is on the south side of them, it's actually on the north side. So one thing that a lot of people think of, like, that don't understand, is that yes, there is a border wall. It runs through a lot of our agricultural farms, but farm workers, and the majority of them are undocumented, are still working on the other side of the border wall. So while the number of traditional migrant families grows less and less every year, H-2A workers was something 2 or 3 years ago, was something that we rarely saw here in Hidalgo County, but we are seeing increasing numbers. And so now I want to talk about, talking about the border wall, let's talk about the challenges that farm workers in Hidalgo County and in the Rio Grande Valley face. And of course, because we're talking about Border Patrol and checkpoints, deportation is the major, I think the biggest, largest factor. Having a border wall and then having a checkpoint creates that unique space where they're caught in limbo. Many of them are here wishing, the majority of them want to go north. Many of them have a lot of family here. They make this their home. Deportation is their major fear. They're threatened with deportation every day. Border Patrol is the one that lets them in to go to the other side of the border wall. So they interact with Border Patrol on a daily basis. Low wages, although what Julie mentioned about, there's supposed to be some type of security because of their status, their legal status. They often face wage theft. They face a lot of discrimination. And the conditions here are extreme heat. Right now, the temperature is like at 90, 99, 100, but it feels like 110 when you walk outside. It is unbearable for anybody. So to be working out in the fields right now, they're facing dehydration on a daily basis. This is in extreme heat situations. Their job is seasonal, and unfortunately, because they're seasonal and they're seasonal workers, there's not security for them. So human trafficking is one of the most common factors, along with limited healthcare access. And like I said, mentioned, they have no access to basic resources such as food stamps. There's a lot of food insecurity. Texas is a Republican state. And as many of you know, there is a false narrative out there that targets migrants, stereotypes them, and that contributes to the fear that they have of deportation, of going to seek medical help. There are a lot of nonprofit organizations here that are focused on the health of farm workers, yet these farm workers, their challenges are they cannot ask for the day off. They don't have transportation. They have limited funds, and they have that fear of being targeted and being deported. Human traffickers, which is labor exploitation, thrive off of this. Many of them are coming over and are in debt to bosses. They might not be in debt. They might find a job working in agriculture, and the contractors or their supervisors hang their legal status over their head. If you quit, deportation. If you want to complain, you want to call Department of Labor, anything, deportation. So on top of that, there's no access to basic resources such as food stamps or maybe, possibly unemployment. There's nothing like that. So these are some of the reasons why Cesar Chavez found it important to organize workers in this area, and why, as Lupe, La Unión del Pueblo Entero, we continue to advocate, not just for farm workers, but we continue to advocate for our entire community. And I want to talk a little bit more about Lupe and what Lupe does. So like I stated, Lupe was founded, or it was originally the United Farm Worker Association. And in 2003, we transferred over to La Unión del Pueblo Entero, which means the union of the entire town. And we are a nonprofit organization. We are very much membership based. We organize in rural neighborhoods. One of the challenges that, although Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta were winning a lot of victories out in the fields with farm workers, one thing that they noticed is that when farm workers came home, they were still struggling in their homes. And one of those, a lot of the ways that they were struggling was they lived in rural neighborhoods that lacked infrastructure, such as paved streets, drainage systems, street lights. So La Unión del Pueblo Entero grew out of that need, the need to help them climb that social ladder, help them advocate for the needs of their family. So every 2 years, we get our most active members together, and they tell us what it is that they want Lupe to focus on in advocating for the next couple of years. So community security and of course health are top priority, education as well. So we continue to keep educating and empowering the community. We do clinics, we do labor, rights clinics, what we call labor rights. We do immigration rights. How do you set an emergency plan in place in case you are detained? What are your rights as an immigrant? What are your education rights? What are your housing rights? And these rights are offered to the entire community, because what happens is that our farm workers, like Julie said, they've been here, a lot of them have been here for a long time. Some of them are new, but what happens is that they belong to mixed families, mixed status families. So while the children are US citizens, the mother doesn't have status, or you might find parents who are legal residents, but their children are still in transition. You find all kinds of different sets of families. That's why we call them mixed families. And often they don't understand their rights. They hear the false narrative and they believe what they hear on television. They believe the stereotypes. So what we're out there doing is fighting those stereotypes, helping them learn how to go to school, how to advocate for themselves, how to go to clinics and when they're ill, and how to advocate for wage theft, if for theft of service, if their wages are not paid in full. We also offer low-cost social and immigration services. So we do income tax, we do notarized letters, we help our members process renewals of residency, naturalization if they want to become citizens, family petitions, and we do offer free ESL and citizenship to all of our members. So our membership, or the amount of services that we offer to the community, it's a lot. It is a lot. People can come in here. What I should say is that we have gained the trust of our community, and people come in here to talk to us and to report to us things that are happening in the community. They will come to us before they go to a social worker, to the Texas Workforce Department, to Department of Labor. They come to us first for whatever reason it might be, whatever it is that issue that they're having in the community. So we're very proud of our membership. We have over 8,000 members across Texas. And to us, that is our strength, helping them advocate for themselves, but themselves or us helping advocate for them as well. And we teach people how to use that Lupe Power. We call it Lupe Power because it's what helps us push for petitions, for political change, for better policies that protect and work for all of our families. It is a struggle, but we continue to push, and our membership grows daily. Our support grows daily. We do work mainly off of grants and off of our membership. So the membership is really the power behind our organization. And, talking about our membership, I do want to let all of you know that anybody and everybody is welcome to become a Lupe member. Our organization, you can find our organization online at lupenet.org. In the next slide, I have information about our membership. Why is our membership so popular? Well, I have a picture here of our membership. So we implemented in our labor rights what to do when you come across a police officer or you're pulled over by a police officer. The membership is $40 yearly, annually, $60 if you're a couple, $20 if you're over the age of 60, or if you're a student. And the membership looks exactly like what you're seeing in the picture. It has your picture. It'll have your birth date, your height, your weight, all your identifying information along with your address. So because we live in a state where there are policies where a police officer can ask you what is your legal status and can hold you until a Border Patrol officer comes along, we train our members to use this Lupe membership as a form of identification. Although it is not a valid government ID, nor is it a work permit, we do explain to them that this will allow them to identify themselves to police officers, and they have the right to remain silent. They don't have to give their legal status, because often their legal status is something that people can use against them. So because of that, we have a lot of the migrant community, when they are here, once they've been here for more than 6 months in our country, they come into Lupe to learn more about their rights, more about how they can, through the membership, identify themselves, the benefits of having a Lupe membership, knowing their rights, knowing that they can also go to school, that they can, that they can have For example, ITINs, something that they can request from IRS so that they can report their income. We guide them. We tell them as much as information we can so that they can improve their life and not live so much in fear. So how can someone participate and support Lupe? Well, you can visit us online at lupenet.org. You can also visit us on our social media websites, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. We're everywhere. And there is a digital organizer that also helps people anywhere they are in the country become members and support Lupe. So if you want to be part of Lupe, you want to participate with us, we have actions for everybody. And we have ways for everybody to participate as well. And this would be an amazing way for you to help us continue to support the work that we continue to do here at Lupe. So if anybody else has any questions, I'm here. Otherwise, I turn it over to Julie.
Well, Rose, why don't we see if we have some questions? We still want to take a little bit of time to talk about ways people can take action. But let's take a few minutes to see if there are questions that have come in the chat. Rose, can you help us with that?
So right now we've just had kind of one question. Wasn't really a question, but something they were hoping to learn, which was about policy reform related to food justice. Julie did mention this earlier, but I want to encourage anyone who's interested in food justice to go to our website, nfwm.org, and under our resource section, you'll see where we have all of our Harvest of Justice, which is our educational program. And in 2021, we dedicated that education program to be about food justice. So we have it broken up into 6 weeks, 6 different topics, different ways that people can take action, ways that can support farm workers and farm worker communities. But in terms of specific policy reform related to food justice and food insecurity, I can see if Julie or Elizabeth have something to add on that. I will say that sometimes with the Farm Bill, I know there's a nutritional component to that. So sometimes they try to allow for some food justice reform along with that. And so if you're interested, you might research more about the Farm Bill, which has to be voted upon in September, mid-September, I think. I don't remember the specific date. But Julie, Elizabeth, do either of you know any specific policies related to food justice?
Well, one of the things I know that some of our farm worker partners, the groups that we're connected to that are organizing farm workers, that they're pushing is to expand access to school lunches, so that more farm worker children in communities can be part of the school lunch program. If you think about the statistic that I shared earlier about the prevalence of hunger amongst farm worker families, that would be a key point of assistance for them. Besides that, the farm workers are asking in the Farm Bill for an expansion of the SNAP benefits that they be open to children who live in the community, who are part of the community, whether they have documents or not. Just the idea that children need food, and that this is a good way to provide that kind of assistance. So in relation to food justice, there's ongoing challenges related to ownership. For farm workers in this country, one of the things that would help so many of them is a path to citizenship, so that their rights are protected like other U.S. citizens' rights. That has been a point of contention for so long, unfortunately. But that would really help to provide some food justice for the people that are actually part of this food chain, that they're picking the food that we have, and that's what they're providing our food. So this is a discussion we have a lot at the National Farm Worker Ministry, that farm workers really get squeezed at the bottom because they're a large part of the employment costs related to growing the food in our country. And we find a lot of farmers, landowners, especially small farmers, are being squeezed out as far as how much they can get for their crops. And they tend to look at how can they reduce their the costs of employment, how can they reduce their payroll. But then what we don't see is that the corporations who benefit from that food, we don't see them being squeezed in the same way, right? So so we are constantly involved in campaigns to put pressure on companies, we support several farm worker food certification programs. One of those is the Coalition of Immokalee Workers Fair Food Program. So we've joined them for years in their boycott of Wendy's to get Wendy's to pay literally a penny a pound more for the tomatoes that are harvested that they use in their restaurants, a penny a pound more. So that's one place that we've been involved. We've been involved in an effort to push Reynolds American Tobacco, which is now owned by British American Tobacco, to improve the conditions of farm workers in their supply chain. But in relation to food certification, there's an organization in Vermont, it's based in Vermont, works in the Northeast. And right now they don't have a boycott, but they're pushing Hannaford supermarkets to be part of a program similar to the Coalition's Fair Food Program, which is called Milk with Dignity, which addresses all sorts of issues for farm workers on dairies in the Northeast. And we'd love to see both of those programs go nationwide for every product that we consume in the U.S. A penny a pound more for tomatoes doesn't seem overwhelming. And at the same time,
I was just saying, somebody has a quick follow-up, and then I need to send a question over to Elizabeth as well regarding Lupe. But somebody wanted clarification. Are you saying that children of migrant workers don't qualify for free and reduced lunches in, say, Title I schools or schools?
If they're not citizens, if the school asks that question, then they are not eligible.
Yeah, I would imagine it is going to vary greatly by state to state.
Yep. There are some states and some communities that have expanded that within the community, but as a federal program, it does not apply to people that are not U.S. citizens.
And then Elizabeth, someone wants to know, is Lupe able to do anything in support of H-2A workers?
Yes, so like I mentioned, H-2A workers were not a large population. We did see many of them here in the Rio Grande Valley, but there has been a trend. Julie touched base when she was talking about the kind of policies that we need help with. We desperately need it. I do believe that this country needs immigration reform. There has not been an amnesty or a path for migrants to get legal status since the 80s. And unfortunately, the migrants that were our farm workers that received this amnesty are now elderly. They don't work. Their children are US citizens that are now professionals or working in other industries. And the majority, we see that the majority of numbers of farm workers is increasing to those who are undocumented or H-2As. There is a large need for assistance with H-2As because H-2As are also at risk of being exploited. The fact that many of them don't or can't read at the same capacity that we can, it leaves them vulnerable. So working with H-2As, and if you were to ask this question to anybody else here at Lupe, they would say, what is an H-2A worker? But because of my experience working with farm workers, and the trust that we have gained in the community, we do have H-2A workers that will call in and let us know about their horrible conditions. I remember the first time that I went to go see an H-2A group. There was 16 men to a 1-bedroom house. And when I mean 1 bedroom, I mean it was 1 room and 1 bathroom, no kitchen. I was shocked at the conditions that they were living in, and how close it was to the Rio Grande Valley. The first time that I went to go see the living conditions for H-2A workers here in Hidalgo County, I was shocked as well. Just like undocumented workers, they are vulnerable as well. And we want to protect all workers. La Unión del Pueblo Entero advocates for everybody. We want equal, or we want everybody to be treated equally and to be recognized for the value of work that they bring to this country, how they contribute. So absolutely, when we're talking about reform or any policies that will help us improve working conditions, then we're all for it. Our biggest, I think, one of it, we're all over the place here in Texas. Many of you are aware of the policies that we're fighting here in Texas. One of the policies that we're trying to introduce is simply driver's license, make it easier for people to get driver's license, so that a lot of these mixed status families can obtain a driver's license if they're the only person that can drive in their family. We're also attempting to immigration reform. Here in Texas, we're fighting right now some dangerous policies that would put a lot of people at risk. But on a daily basis, that's our job, to remind people how to advocate for themselves. H-2A, H-2A is the application that they filed. I know that the A is for agriculture. I'm not sure what H-2A stands for, but I know that the A is for agriculture, because there's also H-2B. And you see a lot of shrimpers come in through H-2B visas as well. These are visas that allow for workers, for employers to request workers from other parts of the country, I'm sorry, from outside of the country, and to bring them in seasonally for work. So they're supposed to be working for about 9 months or so. But we've seen an increase of them in these past few years. In my opinion, H-2A, this form of workers, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because these workers are exploited as well. What we do need is immigration reform. And in our state, our governor just recently tried to implement a law that would force undocumented parents to pay for their child's education, which it didn't go through. We're happy that or it hasn't gone through yet. But our governor has been, just like Florida, been attempting to implement a lot of scary laws out there. So our job is to talk to the community and like I said, help them understand their rights, help them. We have many people that protest with us, that participate in actions with us. It's all about being strong together as a community to improve our community for everybody. I hope that answers your question.
We do want to make sure there are some other questions, but we certainly want to make sure we go through our actions. Some of those will be answered, I think, when we share our actions with you of ways that you can take part nationally, state, and within your community as well.
So let me run through that kind of quickly because on our website, we have a piece that goes into it a lot more, but banning organophosphates, those are pesticides that affect the neurological system. This is a piece of federal legislation that was introduced in the last Congress, and we expect for it to be introduced in this Congress. And we're working with Earth Justice and Alianza Nacional de Campesinos on that. The Asuncion Valdivia heat stress bill is about establishing federal heat stress regulations around the country that would provide rest, hydration. I forget, there are three pieces. But anyway, this would help reduce heat stress for farm workers, specifically in the field. It's named after a farm worker who died from heat stress in California years ago. Fairness.
Breaks.
What?
Breaks. Rest. Breaks. Yeah. Mhm.
Yes. Rest, breaks, and hydration. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah. Shade. Mhm.
Fairness for farm workers is basically by another name. It's called the overtime bill for farm workers. This one has not been introduced in this Congress, but this is an effort to literally get farm workers the overtime that is in the Fair Labor Standards Act. But it has not gone into effect nationally. The CARE Act is a piece of legislation that would make legislation for child laborers in agriculture to be the same as child laborers in other industries. So it's called the CARE Act. That's short for Children's Acts for Responsible Employment. Other sort of broader ways to take action are to support path to citizenship for farm workers. This keeps getting batted around back and forth, H-2A regulations and whether those will go through, but also some different proposals, some which have been really distressing. And there's been no consensus about this. There's been little bits and pieces here and there, but nothing so far. So we continue to call for and look for path to citizenship. And if you're on our e-news, as we see these things emerge and we hear from farm workers about what things to support, we'll be sharing those with you and you can help us with them. This farm worker campaigns, we have a place on our website for taking action, and when farm workers ask us to support their campaigns, whether it be legislative or otherwise, we do updates about that. You can read about boycotting Wendy's there, and you can look at the food certification programs that are currently in existence. I would say to you that right now we just need more people to be asking for them so that they become more prevalent across the country. Under state actions, sometimes states, but it's tedious to take action state by state, but there's state legislative efforts. So we take on those as our farm worker partners do. There's been some heat stress regulations that have gone into effect. California had the first set of them. They need to be improved. They need to be monitored better, but they have them. Washington State and Oregon have been working on emergency regulations, but the advocates on the ground are trying to make those consistent, not just from when there's an emergency. Overtime and there are other places that are working, other states that are working on that. Overtime for farm workers is another one. California put that into place a number of years ago. New York State passed a law several years ago, and it's fully enforced now, although it's getting a lot of pushback. There's other states. Farm Worker Justice has a place on their website to see what states specifically have it. It's not nearly all of them. It's less than 10, but it's a start. The driver's license, that movement has expanded to different places. New Jersey won that for farm workers in their state, the Garden State. And there are other places, but Elizabeth mentioned that a little while ago, that's something that they want to see happen in Texas. And then the prevalence of anti-immigrant bills. I just wrote a piece in our last e-news about this. it's pretty distressing. The anti-immigrant rhetoric that goes on, and then the rise of bills that one was recently passed in Florida, and the backlash to that, the realities of that are troublesome. We should be learning from times in the past when we've done this in Arizona and Alabama and other places. And communities support migrant ministries, do everything you can to raise awareness about farm workers that are there, sponsor educational programs. We hope we have resources that you can use on the ground to help people know more about this, and we're happy to help you with those things. Use social media to change the conversation. And if you're not on social media, use your own personal conversation to family and friends. When you sit down at table and you offer grace, I hear a lot of people thank God for farmers, thank God for farm workers too. Let's expand that and join that. And so we're happy to be partners with you in this process. That's a real quick rush through. And I think Rose will tell you, we're going to send you out some links to stay in contact with this. And we just appreciate your time today and your care for farm workers.
Yes, please make sure to follow ourselves and Lupe on social media. We've made it both easy for you. It's for NFWM, it's NFWM Ministry. And for Lupe, they've made it easy as well. It's Lupe_RGV. So if you search those in whatever social media platform you're using, you should be able to find us and sign up for our emails as well, so you'll stay up to date. This really is the best way to stay up to date, what's happening, the actions that you can take. We will send out this recording of this webinar, and there were some questions that we weren't able to get, so we will try to address those questions in that follow-up email as well. But other than that, thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was great to see you, Julie.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm glad that, there's so much more I could have said, but if you want to learn more, go visit us on our websites, on our social media. Give us a like. It would really help us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.